Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the Motivational Intelligence Podcast. I'm Sean Johnson, your host for this journey where we deconstruct success, what makes people and organizations successful, break that down for you into nice little bite-sized pieces so you can use it in your own life and career. Today's episode is about the autopilot of your life. Is it leading you in the right direction, or is it leading you astray? So is a conversation with Dave Naylor about habits. Are your habits empowering you or depowering you? And we break down the 5 habits that can be holding you back in your career. So this is something you really want to pay attention to, and something that you might not realize could be holding you back from that promotion that you want, that raise that you want, starting that new company that you want, whatever it may be. These are the 5 things that might be standing in your way. So I hope you enjoy this episode of the podcast. Let us know what you think on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all those good things. And make sure you subscribe to this podcast on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening, and leave us a review. Let us know what you think. Hopefully 5 stars. But would really love your honest feedback and let us know what you want to hear more of, less of, and all that good stuff. All right, enjoy this episode.
The Motivational Intelligence Podcast is produced by the team at 2Logical. 2Logical is an international corporate training firm and the world's leading expert in motivational intelligence, which is the ability to understand, manage, and change the motives people have. 2Logical offers over 30 different keynotes, workshops, and full training courses to small, medium, and large Fortune 500 companies in 53 countries, a lot of which you're probably familiar with. Pfizer, Bank of America, GE, Constellation Brands, P&G, and more. All solutions are completely customized, and the feedback from these sessions will blow your mind. If you have any training or speaking needs or just want to say hey, head over to 2logical.com.
All right, we're back with Dave Naylor, back in the house. Dave, how you doing?
Doing well, Sean. How are you today, man?
I'm doing good. I figured we could talk today. I came across this interesting study from Duke University. And basically the net out of this study was that habits account for 40% of our behaviors on any given day. So it's something like 7 hours a day. We're basically on autopilot with these patterns that have gone through our brains. So I wanted to kind of talk today about what does that mean, and how is it important to our lives and our careers?
Well, to your point, Sean, I mean, our habits, they play a huge role in basically the outcomes of our lives. I think it was Aristotle who he said we are what we repeatedly do. So success it's not an action but a habit. Yeah. And so I remember years ago I was chatting with my mentor, and he made a kind of a comment about something that he'd been thinking about for a while, and he said, he goes, what I've come to realize more and more, he said, is that, life is very much, it's based on the cumulative theory. He says, everything that you do, you're either building positive or you're building negative momentum for yourself. He goes, and if you do enough of one or the other, he goes, life is going to go in very different directions for yourself in life. And so if you think about our habits play into that. If we have a habit of eating candy, well, what's the outcome of that is that we're going to end up gaining weight. If we have a habit of sitting on the couch and drinking beer, then that's going to it's going to impact our health in that sense, versus the habit of going to the gym and working out, or the habit of running, or those kinds of things. And I think in our society, a lot of times what we have a tendency to do is we tend to attack the outcomes of things rather than really attacking the habits that lead to those outcomes. So you have folks who, they're overweight, so they go on this crash diet or something like that, but they they never stop and think about changing their eating habits, and that's why so many of these diets, people go off them and they just slide right back to where they were because they never fundamentally changed what got them there in the first place.
Yeah, same thing with smoking.
Exactly. So we can force short-term outcome changes, but if we don't change the habit that got us there, we'll never get long-term outcome changes.
Yeah, I like the cumulative theory because if you look at your habits, it really is like you can kind of look at them as this source of momentum that's either working for you or working against you. And that inertia, without recognizing that source of that, you're kind of blindly fighting this sense of inertia, or why isn't this working?
Yeah.
And it's kind of like this subconscious thing that you could be fighting against.
Yeah. I'm probably dating myself by telling this story, but
what are you, 28, 29?
Yeah, exactly. My mother said years ago, she goes, in my mind, I still think that I'm 18, but my body keeps reminding me I'm not, And, I don't think I'm 18, but my body definitely keeps reminding me that I'm not, But I remember years ago, I was listening to a tape series by Ken Blanchard, and in it he said, he talked about what we're talking about, this cumulative theory, and he related it back to love and hate, which I thought was kind of an interesting perspective. He goes, in everything that we do every day and the decisions that we make, he said, stop and ask yourself, by taking this action or by doing this, am I bringing more love or hate into the world?
That's a really interesting way to look at it.
Yeah, and and it's funny. I think back to that, and man, that was a lot of years ago. But little simple things nowadays, like when you're in traffic and that person's trying to cut in, and there's the one side of you like, well, not for nothing. Why did you wait till the last minute kind of thing, Yeah. And then I think about his words from all those years ago, and I'm like, if I let the guy in, I'm bringing more love into the world, So I feel a little better about slowing down and letting him in. You know? But it is. It's that cumulative theory. It's it's what are we building?
Yeah. So why do we have these? I mean, maybe it's good for us to understand the source of them. Why do we have these habits in the first place? They seem to be kind of these patterns that we're just kind of flipping an autopilot switch. Why do we have them?
If you really think about it, our habits, they greatly simplify our lives. It's the default ways of doing things, or the default ways of responding things, or those the automatic, that autopilot that you talked about. Think about how different our lives would be if we didn't have that. Right. Yeah. So every time you approach something, you'd have to sit down and think it through, and what would be the next step, and So I mean, we couldn't function in life.
It'd be exhausting.
Exactly. If we didn't have those habits, so it would require so much more mental energy to exist. Without having our habits in that sense. So they really are the shortcuts that. They allow us to, focus on those broader things in life, or, those types of things. And really, to no small extent, the reason we have them, they genetically, they're hardwired into us really, from our ancestors, because the habits of our ancestors really perpetuated the survival of the species.
Yeah. I guess that makes sense. I mean, it seems that a lot of this stuff, just draws back to the evolution, of the species, and a lot of it seems to draw back to that, where it's survival, and sometimes it's like habits, are really beneficial, and other times where it's fear or something like that, it's not so much.
Yeah, and it's equally possible for people to have. And it's equally easy for people to develop the positive habits as well as the negative ones, because most people, most people don't consciously choose their habits.
Yeah. They just kind of happen.
Exactly. And because we don't pick and choose our habits, by definition, you're going to end up with a bit of a mixed bag of positive and negative.
Yeah. And so, maybe that's an important point is, maybe we should better understand how do habits actually work, and maybe if we can understand that, that puts us in a little bit better of a position to choose consciously versus, crossing our fingers and hope we get lucky.
It's a little bit of a crapshoot there.
Yeah, exactly.
There's actually there's a very cool book called The Power of Habit. And it was written by a New York Times reporter, Charles Duhigg, I think was his name. And and he talks a little bit about how our habits work, and it's generally accepted that there's I think it's 4 components that make up our habits. So there's a cue, something that sets off a habit, or causes us to go down a given pathway of thought or response. So the cue is sort of it's our trigger, if you will, right? And that trigger, then it creates a desire, in a sort of craving to and that craving in turn, now that if you think of these like kind of dominoes falling, so the first domino is the cue, and then it knocks over the next one, which is the craving, and then the one after that is our response, or what's the action that we take as a result of this cue. And it could be an action of thought. It could be an action of physical response, a behavioral reaction. And then last but not least, there's the reward side of things. So that's the outcome of the habit type of thing.
Yep.
And so we talked about a few minutes ago the ancestral side of things, and if you think about the prehistoric, our ancestors from back then, the habits that they had were really survival habits. So they were habits that led to them being able to find water or find food or reproduce, or things that were tied to the survival of the species. And so they would see a cue, like perhaps a valley, and they knew that in valleys there tended to be water at the base of the valley, and the craving was their thirst, and so the response would be go down into the valley, and the reward would be finding water.
Getting the water,
and so that's how the habits were worked in our ancestors. If you think about it more in a modern day sense, I mean, food and water isn't as it's a little simpler to get nowadays. Right. Our lives aren't consumed with it. Yeah. So I think today, if you think about it, our in a modern day sense, our habits tend to be a lot more psychologically based than survival based.
Right.
So what are the cues and the desires? People they desire acceptance, they desire security, they they want love or praise or approval or satisfaction, gratification. They want advancement or status. So a lot of those, a lot of those things now are much more rooted in feeding us psychologically than feeding our stomachs.
Yeah, it's the mental part of it as opposed to the physical.
Right.
So you mentioned before that a lot of people, we don't really consciously choose our habits; they just kind of seem to happen, and a lot of it, seems to be built on that psychological aspect. So if we're not consciously choosing our habits, how are they developing?
Well, there's a lot of things I think that ultimately influence the way that we develop our habits. I mean, certainly, as with our ancestors, there's the kind of that social conditioning. So we we develop habits as a result of our upbringing, or the people that we hang out with, our parents. So there's the the societal side of things that it causes us to create habits. There's also our personal experiences and things that will that will influence those. And there's the way that we frame things in our minds. Do we frame things in a positive sense or a negative sense, or as a result of doing this in the past, was there a positive or a negative outcome that came as a result of that, and then that causes us to to develop a habit in those regards. So I think there's a lot of those external factors that initially start to pave the road of our habits, and then with repetition we begin to really cement them home. You talked about that Duke study earlier, and it is interesting. There's been a lot of work and a lot of research in the last handful of years about the influence of our habits, and to what degree do they influence us, and the numbers are, they're broad. I've seen it was neurobiologists and the cognitive psychologists. I've seen the numbers anywhere from 40 to 90% of our lives is habits. So you're right. You used the term autopilot, and even if you pull that towards the the more conservative side, half of our lives,
half your life is on autopilot,
and so we just are, we just automatically respond to things certain ways,
and most people never stop to think, how is this autopilot set up? You're just on this autopilot without really understanding or even thinking about, like, is this thing set up right? Or
totally.
Am I, completely going off course here when I flip the autopilot switch?
Well, and it's not even it's not even as conscious as flipping a switch.
Right. It just happens.
Yeah, exactly. That cue occurs, and our brain just automatically defaults into that habit pattern. And so it's an automated response that we go through, in our lives, and largely we're not even consciously aware that we're doing it. If we had the power to pick and choose, like, oh, do I want to default to this habit or not, then we would be much more in control. But once they're set in place, they just, unless an individual really raises their awareness, they just automatically go into these, into the loop kind of thing.
And it kind of, it's this autopilot that seems to flip on without our permission, really. And it's almost like the GPS is picking a destination without our consent.
Exactly.
And then, we're just showing up to this destination thinking, how the hell did I get here?
Right.
And the autopilot has been taking us there the whole time.
So, here's kind of a crazy thought. So if we are the sum total of our habits, then, as individuals, you stop and think about if somebody is in a really bad spot in their life, and it's a little bit daunting or overwhelming to realize that it's your own habits that have brought you to that terrible spot in your life. If you're in a great spot in life, it's a lot easier to accept the fact that, well, my great habits have brought me here.
Exactly.
But, the fact that you're right, that it's, the sum total of the actions that we've taken have entirely controlled the outcome of our lives.
Well, and I think, it seems to tie in the importance of goals. If you are in that spot, it's almost like reverse engineering, the GPS to set a destination. That's where the goal comes in, but you need both. You need this understanding of, okay, this is where I want to end up.
Right.
But you also need to be able to reverse engineer, how am I going to get there? What are the habits that are going to get me to this spot? Because you could set the goal, but if you don't change the autopilot, it's just going to keep taking you to the same spot.
I mean, you could set a goal to be a multimillionaire, but if all of your habits are consistent with being broke, it's a wonderful goal to sit there and dream about, but you'll never get there. And I think that's a great way to look at it, is to really, if there's a place that you desire to be in life, to to then begin to think about, okay, so what are the habits that I need to begin to create in my life that will lead me there over time?
Yeah.
And then take the time to, really study individuals who have developed that habit and figure out what were the best practices and things that, that led them to where they were.
Yeah, absolutely. So, say if somebody is in a spot where, they have a goal, it's a career goal, it's a weight loss goal, whatever it is, and the autopilot just keeps taking them back to this same spot. Are there common habits, or I guess common habits of or reasons why somebody's sitting there saying, well, I've been setting this goal for a while and I keep ending up in the same spot, I keep having this weight loss goal and I'm not losing any weight, or I'm trying to quit smoking and I keep smoking, or whatever it is, I'm trying to get a promotion or start a new business and it never seems to work out. Are there common habits that are derailing them or limiting them or taking them off course, or are there commonalities there?
It's kind of interesting because as I'm sitting here thinking about that question, it's a while ago, I had written an article. I think it was a Forbes article, and we had written the article around the career side of things and what really are the career limiting habits that that hold people back, and I actually never really thought about it kind of through that lens until you just asked the question. But it's the career limiting habits basically really are the life limiting habits of individuals. They're exactly the same, and so really they're the what are the most debilitating habits that that kind of that cause the negative loops in individuals. So I think there's decidedly there's a winning hand of negative habits that people can have that invariably will cause their life to spiral in directions that they don't want it to spiral in.
Yeah. What are they? You just gonna hold out on us, or
leave you in a
build up this
cliffhanger.
suspense?
Yeah. So in episode number 2,
come on, man, give me the goods.
Well, over the years, obviously, traveling around and working in organizations and interacting with people. I think one of the most debilitating habits that an individual can have is the victim thinking side of things. Sure. There's very few things that rob away. In fact, I don't really know that I can think of anything that robs away a person's power as much as victim thinking does. And it becomes a crutch for a person, that allows them to basically justify every aspect of mediocrity in their life, because when they trip into that victim mode, it becomes about pointing fingers and placing blame and making excuses and rationalizing why things aren't working out, and so it just becomes this very self-perpetuating negative loop for them. Yeah. And and they don't even necessarily realize that they're in that loop, but they just put themselves on a very downward spiral in everything in life, and so there's very few things. In fact, I don't know if there's really anything that I can think of that's top of mind, that if a person changes that habit, it correspondingly changes the pathway that they put themselves on in life. So I think that's that is a huge one. We talk about in our leadership classes, the concept of ultimate responsibility and kind of breaking away from that victim thinking, and whether it's something that's perpetuated across an organization, across the team, or just in our own minds, that habit of victim thinking is a hugely debilitating one for individuals in life.
Yeah. So I mean, maybe it'd be helpful to look at it. You had mentioned the kind of framework of a habit. How habits form and how they're built, and talking about victim thinking, where if you put it through that lens, the cue is probably something. It's a new challenge or new opportunity. And you kind of mentioned the response of it ends up pointing fingers and placing blame.
Yeah.
What's the craving part, or it seems to be kind of like the psychological aspect that causes somebody to all of a sudden point fingers and place blame on something, or basically kind of like you said, you end up giving up control.
Yeah, I think that as human beings, and it's been fairly well proven that we seek cognitive consistency, which is the sameness in things, because there's a certain psychological comfort that we get from that. And if you look at the victim thinking, or that victim mindset, I think it's easier for people it's easier for people to defer responsibility onto somebody else than to defer responsibility onto themselves.
Yeah.
And so I think the craving there is that if my life sucks, it's easier for me to say my life sucks because of you, rather than my life sucks because of me. So there's a certain, we talked about how the cues and the cravings now are much more psychologically based than than survival based in the past. And,
sure.
And so
it's kind of protection of that self-image.
Totally. Yeah, totally. And when we all understand the influence of that, that at the very crux of everything, inside of us psychologically, we're driven to either enhance that self-image or protect that self-image.
Yeah.
And candidly, more people are rooted on the protection side than the enhancement side. So that tends to default to the more towards those negative, that negative side of things.
Yeah. So that craving, something pops up, and that craving piece is, I need to protect, my self-image, my self-worth.
Right.
So I'm going to blame everybody else.
Right.
And that way, that reward is, it wasn't my fault.
Right.
That was somebody else's fault.
And it's absolutely in the challenge that we run into, and this is the kind of the really crazy part about habits, is the reward side of things. It's based in the psychology side of things we talked about earlier. But there's also a biological influence of that as well, because what happens is those rewards, they trigger a dopamine response in our brain.
Oh yeah.
And so dopamine is it's that neurotransmitter that is the kind of that feel good hormone that we have in us. So we get a psychological reward, but we also get a biological reward.
Right, yeah. So I actually feel like it saves myself psychologically, but I also feel good.
Right, exactly. So that only serves to reinforce the patterns even more.
Yeah, right. And that makes so much sense, and I guess it really feeds into that habit thing, because dopamine is so addictive. Mm-hmm. That's the reason people are gambling addicts.
Exactly.
The list goes on.
Oh, it's the reason that people get addicted to, social media. It's the reason they get addicted to anything, know. And so you're right that, that dopamine response is incredibly powerful. So it's the there's the physiological, and the psychological, properties of
rewards.
it.
Yeah. Interesting. And then, as a result, it's okay, I'm going to protect my self-worth. I point the fingers and then I get the dopamine hit.
Yep.
But as a result, people, you said something interesting before that, it just comes with such a lack of power or lack of control as a result of that being in that cycle.
Right.
You never actually take control. You're just relinquishing control to everybody else.
Exactly.
And kind of hoping for the best, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean that's the scary thing about we talk about it in our workshops and things that the challenge with victim thinking is you can't build anything on it. It's just not a foundation that is stable enough to create anything of magnitude on top of. So. There's the old saying, misery loves company. Well, so too does mediocrity, and so, those people that are in that victim thinking habit, they pull others into it as well.
Yeah.
So it becomes, perpetuating not only for ourselves, but also many times for people around us.
Yeah. And I mean, if you think about, anybody that's actually, that has achieved anything of significance, you can just imagine them, and I think this is pretty true across the board, that none of them wanted to give control to anybody but themselves for where they were going to end up and what they were going to accomplish. Yeah. They weren't leaning on anybody else. It was I want control, and lending control to somebody else would probably have made them very uncomfortable.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the things that's interesting. Just as a little aside. I think that's one of the things that challenges many times startup entrepreneurs and things like that in terms of growing an organization and transitioning to that CEO role side of things.
Sure, they want their hands on everything.
Right.
It becomes the micromanaging problem.
You can't scale the business.
Yeah. That's interesting. And I think so true that it's that. Well, I'll just do it because, somebody else is going to screw it up.
Yeah, well, if you want something done right.
Do it yourself. Yeah. No, it's an interesting paradox. All right, so victim thinking is number one. What else we got?
The next one is really that the habit of rigidity, and the habit of rigidity again I think is it's tied to taking comfort in the sameness of things. It's tied to cognitive consistency. Again, it is it is clinging with the legacy way of doing things. And fighting or resisting change.
Yeah.
And again, it goes back. You talk about the self-image. There's a component of that in this one too, because with change comes uncertainty. Sure. And with uncertainty comes risk.
Yeah.
And with risk comes fear. And so now all of a sudden you got this whole little toxic mixing combo of things that that causes people to really fight change. And we understand the inevitability of change.
Yeah.
But if an individual practices that, whether it's in their career or in their personal lives, it dramatically holds them back, because we understand that as in nature, as in life, things are constantly changing.
Yeah.
So it's I think it was Benjamin Franklin said the only two certainties in life are what? Death and taxes.
Death and taxes. Yeah.
So I probably death, taxes, and change. Would be appropriate there.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's something this a change in environment or a change in business landscape or a change in whatever. Well,
a change in strategy, a change in the goals, a change. I mean, change is rampant around us.
Oh yeah, especially now. And so that it evokes this craving for stability.
Oh yeah.
And so then you kind of just ignore the responses. I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing, and I'm going to never embrace it. And
whether it's overt or whether it's or whether it's more subtle. And it's interesting. We go in. We go into organizations, all around the world, and it's incredible that it doesn't matter the industry. It doesn't, I think we've, have done business now on 6 different continents, and the same problems exist in every organization. And so you sit there and you talk with leaders about what are the challenges that you face, and the lack of ownership, the lack of responsibility, the lack of buy-in, that all ties back to the victim thinking, the clinging to the legacy way of doing things, and resistance to change, that ties to the rigidity side of things. And every organization we go into, they see this habit perpetuated within their organization.
Yeah. Well, it is pretty remarkable how, you talked before, obviously it's universal geographically, but it's also universal from a subject matter aspect, and whether it is your career or it is your health or it is your finances or whatever it is, that the same habits can hold you back in your career that are holding you back from dropping those 20 pounds, and it doesn't matter whether you're in North America or Antarctica. It's kind of the same deal.
Well, and it's kind of interesting how if we were to step back and really study people's lives, very likely you would see that the same habits that are holding them back in their personal lives are also the ones that are holding them back in their careers, and holding back in their relationships, and holding them back in their physical health, and holding them back in their finances. It's the ripple effect of that same negative habit.
Which it speaks just to the power of breaking those. How far-reaching the impact is. So, all right, so the rigidity, there's this craving for stability, so they, whether it's consciously or subconsciously, they're resisting the change, they're kind of putting their head down, they're sticking to it with the hopes that, they maintain this sense of stability. They avoid the change that's
this change
coming.
Will go away. Someone's going to realize it's flawed, and the way we've always done it is a better way to do it.
Exactly. But the challenge with that is the change isn't going away.
No.
And it's especially now. And so as a result of that, you have with people with that, when we have that habit, you're eventually going to get left behind.
Oh yeah,
there's just no two ways about it.
Yeah, and whether it's left behind by being let go of, in if you're talking about a career perspective, by being by being labeled in the mind of the individual that you roll up to, and thus you get passed over for opportunities for advancement and things like that. So I think it decidedly can pigeonhole people.
Yeah. All right, rigidity 2. What about number 3?
I would say the third one. The third one is really that habit of kind of negative thinking. Playing the devil's advocate. That side of things I would say is the third one. It's funny. I was moving some rocks around.
That's right. You're the rock guy.
Yeah. Long story. So I was moving some rocks around this weekend, and my neighbor was out in his yard, and he said to me, it's funny. He goes, we get weaker and weaker every year. It gets harder to move those rocks around, And it was funny. I looked at him and I said, "Well, Keith," I said, "I'm trying to maintain some, a positive perspective here." So I said, "So I'm looking at it like the rocks are just getting bigger every year."
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. It's not that I'm getting weaker; the rocks are getting bigger. But so I decidedly think that that negative approach is that habit of negative thinking is a very dangerous one for people to have.
Yeah.
It was actually interesting. Just this morning, I had a client had dropped me an email, and we were kind of getting updated and stuff, and in it he put a link to a TED Talk that was done by Dr. Allison Ledgerwood, I think was her last name. So she's at I think she's at UC Davis. And so the TED Talk was basically about changing positive thoughts, or changing negative thoughts to positive thoughts, was what the TED Talk was on. And so she's done a lot of research on negative thinking in individuals, and she said she goes, it's interesting. She goes, for much of my career, she goes, I spent, publishing papers and things like that. And she said, and so what I find is that, and she goes, this is kind of what led her down this pathway. She said, so if I got an email in the morning and one of my papers was accepted for publication, she goes, I get this kind of, feeling of euphoria, this temporary kind of high, like, oh, isn't that wonderful? Oh, that's great,
sure.
kind of thing like that. And she said, and that'll carry me for like maybe an hour or so. She goes, but then if I got an email that says, oh, we're rejecting your paper, for this reason or that reason. She goes, then I get this kind of emotional low that comes from that. And she said, but what's interesting, what I found was that I drop off the emotional highs fairly quickly, but I don't rebound from the emotional lows anywhere near as quickly.
Huh.
And she said, so it really got me, to kind of begin to study, how do people respond to this, to this negative thinking type of a thing. And she said, what I found through the research, and they've done a number of different studies on this, is that, as human beings, we cling much more to the negative than we do to the positive. We have to work much harder to think positively than to think negatively. Which my wife's gotten big into yoga over the last few years, and one of the big principles of yoga is practicing gratitude. And it was interesting because Dr. Ledgerwood in this process, she talked about the same thing, about the power of practicing gratitude and how we literally it's breaking that negative conditioning side of things.
Yeah.
But we have to exert energy to create a positive thinking habit.
Yeah, and that's what gratitude is.
Right. Versus, whereas the negative thinking habit comes much more easily to us.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I wonder too if they always talk about how bad news sells, and if you turn on the news media and stuff like that, it certainly would support that premise.
Oh yeah, if it bleeds, it leads.
Yeah, there you go. And so again, it plays to this it plays to, but it also reinforces that negative thinking habit.
Yeah, yeah, and it maybe it's that going back to the evolution, it's that protective instinct.
It may well be, yeah.
Yeah, but so somebody with that habit, I think it's probably pretty easy to see that they're just going to try to poke holes in everything.
Oh, yeah.
And that it might make them feel good. Somebody puts an idea up and it knocks them down, so they're not above me now. I maintain my social status.
Yep.
But you never actually end up accomplishing anything yourself. You just kicking the legs out from underneath other people.
And that's exactly it. So it kind of forces a common level of mediocrity in that sense.
Yeah. Any other habits?
Mm-hmm. I think there's a lot of times you'll see that habit of an individual, kind of waiting and hoping that somebody else is gonna make things better, or make us happy, or which again I think is a very, very dangerous habit for individuals, because again we relinquish so much control that there's I think hope is a great thing. I think that when you pair it with waiting, all of a sudden it's like that's the negative cousin there of of it. And so again, we relinquish control if that's the case.
Right. Yeah, it seems like if you have an ambition or you have hope for something, but you're just waiting about it, you're waiting around for it to happen. It seems that you don't really believe that you have control over that it's just something that is either going to happen or it's not.
Right.
And it's outside the realm of your control, and you're just hoping to get lucky.
Right.
But but that's not really how it works.
No, yeah. Sadly, it's not.
Yeah, it would be nice.
Yeah, it'd be great if you could just set a goal to be a millionaire, and then just sit there and hope and wait for
cross your fingers for a while, and
the
checks just start rolling in.
Mm-hmm. It'd be wonderful if life worked that way.
Yeah.
I could win the lottery without even buying a ticket.
Exactly. Here's my monthly millionaire check.
Yeah, exactly.
Any other habits that you feel are or have found are common in, hey, I've set this destination, I've set this goal in my mind, but the autopilot keeps taking me 50 miles to the west.
Yeah.
Any others that you find to be common in people?
We talked a little bit ago about fear, and fear is, I think it's an incredibly powerful emotional trigger for individuals. And again, it's rooted in the survival side of things.
Sure.
We've talked about fear in previous podcasts. But I think that if an individual has a habit of consistently fearing the worst in a situation, that too, they inherently they will put up roadblocks, for themselves, and candidly, it'll probably just drive tremendous inaction in them.
It's the feeling of fear can be a paralyzing.
Oh, it's so debilitating.
Yeah.
And it ripples on so many different levels. So much of we talked earlier about the enhancement and preservation side of things, and the whole preservation thing is rooted in fear.
Yeah.
It's the fear of what if kind of thing, and so I've got to protect where I am, which we can spend all of our time protecting where we are right now, but you will never be anywhere better than where we are right now.
Yeah, we're just we'll hold our ground maybe, but that's about it. And even now, that just holding your ground is pretty much a death wish.
Yeah, exactly.
The ground's going to move beneath you.
Yeah. So I think if we had to step back and really look at it, I think those are the five that we decidedly see most frequently on the business side, and as we're talking about it, on really personal lives as well. It's the habit of victim thinking, the habit of being rigid, and in terms of where one is in life. The habit of negative thinking, the habit of hoping and waiting, that for somebody else to do something, and that habit of just automatically fearing the worst in a situation, and that the fearing the worst thing too is what's scary about that is that also ties back to the power of expectation. We know that, and there's been a lot of studies that have shown that as human beings, we rise and fall to expectations. We rise and fall to our own. We rise and fall to the expectations of others. Yeah. And so if somebody is consistently fearing the worst, think about the expectation that sets in their mind. Yeah,
it's almost that if you are fearing the worst, it's more likely to happen.
So if I'm constantly thinking about the fact that I'm going to get hit by a bus, that may well increase the likelihood I'm going to get hit by a bus. I do. I think that sets an expectation in somebody's mind.
Yeah. Well, and it's there's you've heard the story. They talked about race car drivers with the wall. And they say don't look at the wall, don't think about the wall. And you find like with newer drivers, or you rent a car and get out there on the track or whatever. But you hear the story of I think it was Tony Robbins had said he was out on a track somewhere, and they said don't think about the wall, don't look at the wall. And of course when they say that, that's
exactly what you think about.
It's exactly what you want to do. But he said as soon as he kind of like looked over at the wall, all of a sudden the car started drifting towards the wall, and it really is like if you're looking at it and you're thinking about it, that's where you're body's going to take you.
Yeah.
Which is a dangerous thing if it's a place you don't want to be.
Well, and what is it? We become what we focus on most often.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you're focusing on the wall, you're going to
hit
become
it.
part of it.
All right. So if those are the top 5, the 5 most common that seem to hold people back. So we have those 5. How do we take those 5 negative habits and overcome them or turn them into positive ones?
So how do we really change a habit?
Yeah, basically, yeah. How do we change a habit?
I think the first thing that we have to do, and I think this is true of anything. It's you can't fix something until you first raise your awareness level enough to recognize that it's there.
Yeah.
So I think that's true of our habits too, is that, a person isn't going to let go of the habit of victim thinking if they don't even realize they have the habit of victim thinking,
Yeah.
So.
Well, and that poses a challenge too with, where you said before that a lot of times we're not consciously picking these habits, especially the negative ones.
Yeah.
So it makes it all the much harder to actually identify that you have them.
So to that point, so how do I diagnose if I have a habit of victim thinking, right?
Yeah.
Probably a good way to start is, just really take a moment and get a little reflective for a second and think about, how much of your time and energy goes towards pointing fingers, placing blame, making excuses, and rationalizing.
Yeah.
And, and if you can't answer that question, you might want to sit down with somebody who knows you fairly well and ask them that question, and if and ask them to be honest with you in their response.
Yeah.
Because, those are pretty obvious behaviors of somebody who's got that habit.
Sure. Yeah. So in terms of changing a negative habit into a positive one, first we have to identify it.
Yep.
What do we do? Okay, so we've said, all right, I have this is a bad one. I need to get rid of this. What do we do next?
Well, okay. So think. Before we talked about the what kind of anchors down our habits, right? And it's really that reward side of things that is the anchoring point of our habits. It's the psychological reward, it's the biological reward, right? Yep. So, I think if we're going to change a habit, we have to shift our perception of the reward. So if somebody has that habit of victim thinking, they're like, they're very rooted in, I can't be blamed for this if if somebody else is doing it. It's not my fault.
Right, that's the reward.
Yeah, it's somebody else's problem, not mine.
Yep.
So it's changing that perception from that being the reward to the fact that that I have no control, that I have no influence, that I have and so the reward of breaking that habit is to begin to think that, I am in control and I can begin to influence and I can make a difference and I can improve things and and so now the reward is that I'm much more in control of my own destiny.
Yeah, so it's one, identifying it, and two, reframing,
shifting the perception of the outcome.
Yeah,
from the negative to the positive, so to speak.
Right. And making the pull stronger on the positive side.
Right. And then from there it really comes down to shifting the questions that that we're asking ourselves. With regard to that. So. For somebody who's in that victim thinking loop, rather than just using the affirmation that there's nothing I can do, or I did everything I could, or I can't because all of those kind of things, to beginning to ask ourselves, well, what can I do? How can I make a difference?
Yeah.
How can I approach this differently? How can I communicate better? And so it's the, more of the, the really looking for where can we have areas of influence?
Yeah. Yeah. Making the conscious effort to reinforce that positive habit of that positive psychological habit of how am I thinking about this?
Right, exactly.
What are the questions I'm asking myself? What's the self-talk that I have going on?
Yep.
Because like you said, and we keep saying with so many of these being developed without, people picking them, when they're not being developed consciously, you need kind of that conscious override.
Right, exactly. I love the way you said that, because that's exactly what it is. It's in changing a habit, you have to create a conscious override initially until you develop that new habit.
Yeah.
So the habits are the automated responses. We have automated responses so that we don't have to consciously think about things, because they become the mental shortcuts for us.
Yeah.
But in order to break a mental shortcut, we have to go back to the hard way of doing things. And consciously really begin to think about, ask ourselves different questions until we create the new shortcut.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's identify that you have the habit, reframe the reward, and conscious override.
Yeah. Yep. And the way we consciously override really is based upon the questions that we ask ourselves.
Yeah.
Change the question.
Yeah.
And because just by the very nature of the fact that you're asking a question,
right,
you have to be conscious of the answer.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah.
So we kind of gave the victim thinking example. Let's, if you got the time, let's run down the other four, because I think that would be helpful for people.
Okay. So we talked about victim thinking, right? Yeah. So the we looked at it. So the second one we talked about was rigidity. And so the reward in a person's mind who's rooted in that rigidity side of things is that keeping things the same is better, that it's that there's less chance of things going bad because this way's tried and true, and all of that kind of thing. So that's that's that thought pattern that they're anchored in.
Yeah.
So if they're going to shift that perception, you really have to go back and look at it from another perspective. That with change, you create an evolution of things. With an evolution of things tend to improve.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, you just step back and think about it. If we clung to rigidity, we'd still be in horses and buggies.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
And most people in the dead of winter would be much happier driving to work than riding in their horse and buggy. You know? So it's to remind ourselves that with change comes the ability to evolve and improve.
Yeah. Yeah, change is good.
Right.
Change brings progress.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. And then so the question, and then it's just asking the questions and that conscious override. Once we reframe it that way, that change is good.
Yeah.
Asking those questions that reinforce that.
Right.
That
or like what are the potential upsides of saying yes instead of saying no?
Yeah.
And beginning to look at it, and or thinking about what potentially what opportunities open up by embracing this change. How would how will my life improve? How either an improve, it could be an internal, in terms of my own perception of myself, or improve from an external perspective, how others perceive me, or advancement opportunities, financial opportunities, whatever. But to focus more on what's the upside versus the downside.
Yeah. Well, and I would think, and you could also, even flip that to think, if the change is inevitable, what happens if I don't?
Yeah.
And kind of use that fear against itself in a way.
Yeah.
If change is inevitable, what happens if I don't? Well, maybe I'm out of a job, or maybe I'm not getting that promotion, or whatever it is.
Yeah. The world's going to keep moving whether you resist it or not.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
Either get on board or don't.
Right.
So, all right, so that's rigidity. What about negative thinking?
I think on the negative, and it's, again, to go back and think about, what are the positive outcomes, or what is the best way to look at this? Go back to my neighbor, my neighbor is, those rocks get heavier every year, right? Well, that's the negative way of looking at it. The positive way is, the fact that I'm just picking up bigger rocks now, so so I'm stronger now than I was, and the the reception, the reality is the rocks might be exactly the same size, but as long as I think they're bigger,
exactly, but it's not gonna to your point, with that type of a framing, it could be, that's the difference. That just that framing, even if the rocks are exactly the same size, that's the difference between you going up and picking up the rock and doing the work and you not.
Yeah, absolutely. And going back to the that study there at UC Davis, it's we have to practice that, and in the little things and the big things, and so what is the more positive perspective, and over time that becomes the habit versus the other side of things. Yeah. So so I think that's the big one with with the negative thinking, that with regard to waiting and hoping. Well, you said something a few moments ago. If I do nothing, what's the likelihood that anything is going to get better?
Yeah.
Right. If by me sitting here and me staying silent, and this is true, whether it's in one's career or their relationships or whatever. You think about in relationships how often people are unhappy about something, or they're unhappy with something that their partner has done or something like that, and they just bite their tongue and they hope their partner won't do it again, or those kinds of things.
And wait around.
And versus saying something and actually trying to improve the situation. Yeah. So and that's the same thing as I think true in one's career, that if you've got another department that they keep doing something that's making it hard on our department, and you just hope that they're going to stop doing it. Well, the likelihood, if they don't know it's a problem, the likelihood that they're going to stop doing it is pretty slim and none.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So just sitting there crossing your fingers,
right.
Is, and I think that's a great way to look at it. And it goes to the question on the conscious override. I like the way you put that. If I do nothing, what happens?
Right.
It's probably not good.
Yeah. In all likelihood, things will stay the same.
Yeah, they're going to stay exactly as they are.
Yep.
And if you're not happy with how they are, it's a pretty good motivator.
Yeah. And also just sitting there and saying, am I really comfortable with letting others be in charge of my destiny?
Yeah.
And am I really comfortable going on the assumption that others can read my mind? Am I really comfortable? It's and so asking that different question.
Yeah.
To break that kind of waiting and hoping cycle.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And then so for the last one, how about fearing the worst?
I think the fearing the worst is. Is really taking back and asking ourselves, what is the, we can fear the worst, and we can put all our energy into trying to make that not happen, right? Yep. Which I think was the strategy of not JP Morgan, Getty, John Paul Getty. Or we can, or we can sit there and ask ourselves, well, what is the outcome that we really would like to see happen? Yeah. And what can I do to make that occur? Yeah. Rather than sitting here and, if I'm fearing the worst, then likely I'm going to do nothing about it. Yeah. Versus, sitting back and saying, well, what can I proactively do to either make sure that doesn't happen, or, to assure that the better outcome is going to come my way. Yeah.
Well, and I think it's, it's interesting that, I think the same question for if I do nothing, what happens? Yeah. Things stay the same that we use for hoping and waiting. It also applies here. Mm-hmm. It applies to okay, if this is where I want to go, and it really is that sense of fear is paralyzing. So that's what ends up happening a lot of times is the reason is different. It's I don't think I have control versus I'm afraid. But the net out is I'm not doing anything about it. And if you're not happy with where you're at, that can be a powerful motivator again.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's one of the, I mean, everybody has, and we talked about this I think in one of our conversations around fear, but everybody has those fears. They're not all the same. What I think a lot of times people don't realize though is that fear, it doesn't automatically have to paralyze us. It's okay to experience the emotion of fear, and however, it's even more powerful to realize that just because we're experiencing that emotion doesn't mean that we have to stop.
Yeah, and that's again, it's part of the it's kind of like a mini habit. I think that people have, where they're not consciously picking, I'm afraid, so I'm not going to do anything. It's just kind of what happens. And it's that, again, that conscious override.
There was something I remember, I wish I could remember the specific statistic that they tied to it, but they, years ago, I remember reading something where they had talked about the actual percentage of fears that people have that come true. And it was like a ridiculously low number, like 98% of the things that you fear are never going to happen. And so you think about all of the power that people give to their fears when 98% of the time they're irrelevant. I'm making that number up. It might have been 97, it might have been 94, it might have been 83. I don't remember, but it was a huge percentage.
Yeah, for the amount of time and energy and emotional anguish that you're putting yourself through for something that based on probability is not going to happen.
Yeah. So it's kind of like torturing oneself for the sake of torturing oneself.
Yeah, it's our own form of Chinese water torture. All right. Well, I think that was helpful. We're running a little low on time. Is there anything, any closing thoughts, anything that you wanted to leave our listeners with?
I think that we, just to really circle back and think about where you are in life, right? Whether you're in a great place, whether you're in a bad place, whether you're in a so-so place. But if you're at any place but exactly where you want to be in life, to ask yourself, what are the habits that have brought me here? And if we really begin to ask ourselves that question, and then what are the habits that we need to create to bring us someplace better? Because we are a sum total of our habits.
That's the truth. I think that's a great way to end. Dave, thanks for the time. Everybody, thanks for listening. Hey guys, one more thing before you take off. This is Motivational Intelligence Insider. It's just a very short, exclusive email every Monday that comes from Dave, John, and the guests on this show. This is the only place they share their very, very best stuff, and it's delivered right to your inbox every single Monday. This could include exclusive tips for upping your game, articles they're reading, videos they're watching, stories from the road, and on and on. It's the best way to kick off your week, and this content comes directly from Dave, John, and the guests, and is only available to subscribers of Motivational Intelligence Insider. So if you want these guys and gals to email you their best stuff, go to 2logical.com/insider. That's the number 2logical.com/insider, and drop in your email. And if you do, I hope you enjoy.
The Motivational Intelligence Podcast is produced by the team at 2Logical. 2Logical is an international corporate training firm and the world's leading expert in motivational intelligence, which is the ability to understand, manage, and change the motives people have. 2Logical offers over 30 different keynotes, workshops, and full training courses to small, medium, and large Fortune 500 companies in 53 countries, a lot of which you're probably familiar with. Pfizer, Bank of America, GE, Constellation Brands, P&G, and more. All solutions are completely customized, and the feedback from these sessions will blow your mind. If you have any training or speaking needs or just want to say hey, head over to 2logical.com.